Some interesting additions to the California garden, bountiful spring harvests, some helpful tips for your raised bed garden, and a lot more in today's episode of California Gardening. We will begin with a garden tour. We will look at all the harvests we made. We have some things for you to do in your garden. And finally, we'll look at some cool gardening products. So let's begin with the garden tour, starting with the raised beds. We have our black Cobra pepper that was overwintered, is producing a lot of peppers now, followed by the Anaheim chili peppers, which are doing okay, and the container Prince eggplant, which we planted a lot of these in this raised bed. Right next to the eggplants, we have the okras, and because the weather has not been very warm, some of these okra plants are not doing that well, but hopefully they will start picking up as the weather warms up. And our tomato jungle, as you can see here, just 4 tomato plants, but they've taken off and are producing a lot of tomatoes. On the other side, we have some more okra plants, again not doing that well. And we are growing some beans, as you can see here, right along the edge of the bed. And on the other bed, the first bed, we have some onions that are still growing, couple of eggplants, some cucumbers, and here we have some hyacinth beans that are growing. They are just sprouting and it will be a little bit of time before they become big plants. And that concludes the tour of our raised beds. Let's now look at the containers. We are trying to grow a Loquat Tree for the first time and I'm super excited about it. Our volunteer tomato plant has produced a lot of tomatoes, as you can see here in this container. Our container Prince eggplant has now produced eggplants, as you can see, beautiful looking eggplants. And we are also trying to grow a mango tree, and I'm very excited for this as well. We have some amaranth greens that are growing in this container. We have a lone cauliflower that will be harvested next month. And our potatoes, the container potatoes, are growing very well and I'm pretty impressed with how long they have been growing. And now let's look at the harvest we made, beginning with cilantro. Now cilantro is a cool season crop, grows best in the cooler spring and the fall weather. And we were noticing that the cilantro was beginning to bolt since the temperatures were warming up a little bit. This week actually was quite warm. And as you can see here, the harvest looks quite good. And once your cilantro starts bolting, what you can do is start chopping off the cilantro at the stems. And then the top part of the cilantro will still give you a lot of cilantro, as you can see here. It's a pretty good harvest. And fresh cilantro is absolutely amazing. And as you can see here, the stems have now become more woody and almost about to bolt. And you'll see a difference. Once the stems reach to this size where they've become woody, now you can still keep harvesting it from the sides and let the plant grow. But at this stage, I think it's a good idea to just remove the plants and then use your harvest and use your container for the next plant. You can already see some flowers growing there, and this is an indication that the cilantro has bolted. And now let's look at kohlrabi. We were growing these purple kohlrabi plants in our raised beds, and this has actually been one of the longest growing seasons for our kohlrabi. And this time I made sure we waited long enough to have good sized bulbs. The last time I harvested kohlrabi, the bulbs were quite small, but they were also a little more crunchy and more usable than the large bulbs. So with kohlrabi, it's just a toss up between either harvesting bulbs early where you get smaller bulbs, or wait for a long time and get bulbs like these, the ones that you see here, that are a little woody from the outside, but once you remove the skin, the kohlrabi inside is very tender, very nice, and it tastes amazing. And here you can see some more harvests. And a question that I was asked on my Instagram post when I posted the kohlrabi picture was, how do I use my kohlrabi? Well, the easiest thing to do with kohlrabi is to just eat them raw. They taste amazing when eaten raw. and they also taste amazing when cooked. So when cooking it, I just chop it up and then I boil it with lentils, add some spices, some ginger, some coconut, and then just cook it up. And then it tastes amazing with either quinoa or rice. And kohlrabi makes a great vegetable to grow in your garden. It's just so easy to grow kohlrabi. You should give it a shot. And now let's look at mulberries. We had our mulberry tree that's been growing in our side yard for quite a long time now. And this mulberry is the mulberry that will bloom multiple times during a year. This is, I think, the third time it has bloomed and produced mulberries on this tree. So although the mulberries are quite small, this mulberry tree produces a lot of mulberries. And as you can see here, the harvest is not that great in volume, but almost every day we were just coming, picking some berries. The kids were eating it right off of the plant. So if you want to get a lot of berries in a small space, this is a good variety to grow. But I am going to try some other mulberry varieties very soon and let you know how that goes. And moving on to onions. We were growing this small bulbing kind of onions, the ones that produce smaller bulbs but can be eaten as spring onions. And we started harvesting them from our raised bed. And these have been growing since fall, so it's been growing for quite a while. And as you can see, the bulbs have formed. And it's a good time to start harvesting these spring onions. Now the way these onions are eaten is by just washing them up and then chopping them up just like you see here. And usually eaten raw. I love eating these onions raw. But you can use it just like any other onion as well. And since our raised bed had so many plants, we harvested it little by little, and then eventually one day we just harvested them all. And this is exactly how it's washed and eaten, mostly raw. And kids love harvesting onions. It's one of their favorite vegetables to harvest because they're just so easy to harvest. And we did grow a lot of onions in this small space, so this was a very productive raised bed. And the soil that we are using for our onions is also quite loose, and that is the key to growing good onions, is to have a very well draining soil. Although onions do require a lot of water, just before harvest, a few days or a few weeks before the harvest, you can stop watering your onions. But in this case, these onions are slightly different because they are spring onions and they are eaten raw. You want a little bit of juicy flavor when you're eating the onions. So you don't have to stop watering completely so that the onions have a little bit of juice left inside them. And you can also harvest these onions and then dry them just like any other onions. You can leave them out in the sun and they will do very well. They will dry out and you can store them just like any other onions as well. And as you can see here, the kids love to harvest the onions as well. The soil for the onion should be light enough so that even kids can just pull them out. This is my daughter. She's just pulling out these onions with great ease. And this is how it should be. Your soil should be loose. And it should be loose enough for the onions to be pulled out very easily like you see here. And once again, gardening is a lot of joy, especially with kids. Kids love gardening and they love to help their parents in the garden. And it's a real joy to do gardening with kids. And now let's look at the black cobra pepper. This was overwintered from last year. And it did pretty well. I wasn't expecting this pepper plant to be overwintered and produce peppers right away. But overwintering your plants helps you get your produce right at the beginning of the season. Which means that since the plant is overwintered, it will start triggering fruits in the beginning or as soon as the weather is nice and warm for it to produce peppers. And as you can see, there are a lot of peppers, and this is an extremely hot pepper. For those of you who want to grow extremely hot peppers, this is a good option. But for those of you who do not like hot peppers, you may want to try some other variety. Now I have a pretty good tolerance for hot peppers, and I find this pepper really hot to eat. So this is a pepper that's very high on the Scoville rating for sure. And moving on to potatoes. We were growing the Yukon Gold potatoes in our raised beds, and it was time to harvest those potatoes. Now, I would have liked the potatoes to grow a little longer than this harvest time, but it's still a good time to harvest these potatoes because the potatoes were forming very well. And we harvested one potato plant just to check how big the potatoes were, and they are quite big. We are using the trench method to grow these potatoes. We basically planted these potatoes in a trench, and as the plants grew, we started covering them up. Now, some people also call this the hilling method, but in the hilling method, generally you start at one level and then keep adding soil over the potato plant. In the trench method, you can actually plant the potato very deep and then cover it with soil. So they are similar methods, but also a little different in some ways. In any case, you want to make sure that you cover your potato plants with soil once they are growing. And the reason for doing that is to prevent green potatoes from being formed on the plant. The green potatoes are not edible, they should not be used. And this is one of the reasons why we cover the potato plants as they grow. And in this case, by planting this potato plant in a trench, it was also able to use some of the nutrients from the native soil below the raised bed, and I think that helped the potato plant grow quite well. And as you can see here, these Yukon Gold potatoes produce a lot of large potatoes, and taste-wise, I think Yukon Gold potatoes are extremely delicious. They have a nice buttery taste to them, and I really like eating Yukon Gold potatoes, and they're also easy to grow. So once you start seeing decent sized potatoes harvested from one plant, you can go ahead and harvest the other plants as well. Now if you are not planning to use these potatoes right away, they will store very well underground and still be available for consumption or storage after you harvest them later. But we still harvested all our potatoes together. We wanted to use this raised bed for the next crop. And as you can see, the potatoes are quite deep into the soil, and that's because we planted them in a trench. And this is one more vegetable that kids love to harvest. And this is how our first harvest looks like. As you can see, quite decently sized potatoes. They look pretty and they taste absolutely delicious. Now since the potatoes were of decent size, we went ahead and harvested the rest of the potatoes from the raised bed. And the soil for our raised bed was quite loose and not compacted at all, and that helped the potatoes grow very well in this raised bed. Now for growing potatoes, you want to use a lot of compost. We have a lot of worms in this bed as well that are producing vermicompost all the time. And we also have some perlite which helps with the aeration and drainage for this raised bed mix. And when you're harvesting the potatoes, make sure to look around everywhere in the soil. You never know where the potato is hiding. Some of these potatoes can be absolutely huge. So make sure you harvest all the potatoes. And once you're done harvesting, just make sure you turn over the soil in the entire raised bed and then check for any other potatoes that might be growing. Now, one of the things about the Yukon Gold potatoes is that it is susceptible to blight more than most other varieties that have grown. And when blight hits, you have to remove the leaves and remove all the plants. And I will be showing that in detail in a later section in this video. But that's something to note, that different potato varieties have different characteristics and different disease resistance. So the Yukon Gold potato, although it's quite large in size and it tastes amazing, it is susceptible to blight, late blight, which means that the potato plant will start having discolored leaves later in the season and eventually die. But the other potato variety that I'm growing in the container did not have this problem. So it really depends on what you're looking for. I would still go for the best potato variety that I like to eat and which produces decently sized potatoes. But if you want less maintenance, then you should try growing some other potatoes. And you can see some roots that are coming into this raised bed. And this is a common problem if you have trees around your raised bed garden. And that's why you want to have your trees away from any raised bed gardening that you're doing. If you have large trees, especially like pine trees or really large trees, they will send out roots, and they will send out roots that go into your raised bed and get all the nutrients from your vegetable garden. And in my case, I have some fruit trees very close to this raised bed. Every time I harvest vegetables from this raised bed, I do make sure that I remove all the roots around it. And this is how our harvest looks like. As you can see, beautiful looking potatoes, and we are going to use them right away, so we washed them. If you want to store them, you can leave the dirt on and they store better in that case. But we wanted to use these potatoes right away. And we did a quick weigh-in for all the potatoes that we had. And as you can see, a lot of good sized potatoes. And on an average, you can get about 4 to 5 potatoes per plant. So as long as you're meeting that target, like 3 to 4 at least, then you have had a good harvest, because these are organically grown and they taste amazing. They're really fresh. If you harvest these potatoes and try to cut them, you can see the freshness. You can see that they're crisp and very delicious. And this is how our harvest looks like. And let's do a final weigh-in. And our potatoes weigh in at 13 pounds, which is an impressive harvest from just one 4-foot by 4-foot raised bed. And the potatoes will store for about a few weeks. And I hope you like this Yukon Gold potato harvest. Moving on to strawberries. We were growing our strawberries in this strawberry grow bag. And the benefit of using this grow bag was that the strawberries were a lot cleaner when we harvested them. As you can see, not much of insect damage or any dirt that can get into these strawberries. So I really liked this strawberry planting bag, and I will provide a link to this grow bag in the video description and the comments below. And strawberries will usually produce in the spring and the summer season. And you can see here beautiful looking strawberries. And we were able to harvest strawberries multiple times during the growing season this month. The strawberries just kept producing. And the other benefit of using this grow bag is that you can grow multiple varieties of strawberry in the same bag. And which is why we actually have different varieties, each growing out from each pocket of this strawberry grow bag. And here you can see the strawberries, a lot of strawberries that we harvested. So overall, I was quite happy with the way the strawberry planter bag produces. Helps you grow strawberries that produce fruits that are quite clean, quite nice, and harvested fresh from your home garden. And finally, tomatoes. We harvested our first tomato of the season. And you can see here, beautiful looking tomato. And our tomato plants have taken off quite well. And this was our first tomato harvest, and we expect a lot more tomatoes to grow in this tomato bed. And now let's look at the things for you to do in your garden this month. The first thing you can do is plant some more summer vegetables. We are planting some watermelon seeds here. This is the giant watermelon. And I've usually noticed that the giant variety of seeds are not very viable. This is the giant pepper as well, and we're going to see how these seeds germinate. The viability of the seeds is a big question, especially for these giant seeds, but we'll see how it goes. We are sowing these seeds, and this seed packet is from this year, so hopefully we should get a decent germination rate from these seeds. Now we are also sowing some pole beans. These pole beans will go onto our raised bed, where it will grow on the large easy trellis. And you can see here the beans, they look amazing. The seeds are quite nice. We are going to be sowing these seeds in these seed starting cells, and they will usually germinate in a few days. Now I was talking about the blight for the potatoes. You can see that the leaves of the potatoes look like this when they are struck with late blight. And in this scenario, you can see that the leaves are quite severely affected. Now you should be watching out for this. I actually was a little delayed in removing these leaves, but if you see blight, you should immediately remove these leaves. The containered potatoes didn't have this problem. It was only the Yukon Gold potatoes that were growing in the raised bed that had the blight. But the solution to that is you just remove the foliage, just remove them and do not compost them, just throw them. And you can also start transplanting your summer vegetables. In this case, we transplanted our okra seedlings. We are trying to grow a lot of okra this season, but the weather has been cooler than usual for a spring season, which is quite surprising actually, because it's now end of May and we are still having some cooler days, which is a little surprising for this time of the year. But we are still going to go ahead and plant our okra seedlings because they need some time to settle down before the summer sets in. And once the summer season is on and when the weather is hot, the okra plants thrive. They just love to grow in the warm or hot summer weather. So we want to make sure that we get our plants in before the summer starts. And now let's review some gardening products. This month we will be reviewing some interesting products from a company called Vermis Terra, and they have two products that we will see today. One is the VermiSterra vermicompost and the other product is the VermiSterra worm tea. Now a little bit about this company first. VermiSterra is a family-owned company located in thermal Southern California. They have a huge worm farm with red wrigglers that they feed with organic matter like grass and tree clippings. They have farmed for over 20 years to learn the benefits of using natural organic soil amendments, and their products are OMRI certified. They take care to make sure their worms are fed only organic matter to create a great quality vermicompost and worm tea. The vermicompost and worm tea are neutral pH, so it won't burn plants and is safe for seedlings as well. So the VermiSterra vermicompost is a very fine vermicompost and it comes in two grades. One is the standard grade that we are seeing here. It's a little coarse and can be used very effectively on raised beds and in gardens in the soil. And there is also a premium grade which you can use for seed starting mixes or for indoor plants. Now to use this vermicompost, I usually prepare my raised beds with a lot of organic matter. So this is a good amendment to the raised bed. And as you can see here, you can add this directly on the raised bed. And once you have added this on your raised bed, all you do is just mix it very well into the soil. And vermicompost has a lot of beneficial nutrients that will help your plants uptake all the nutrients pretty quickly. Now you can also sprinkle some vermicompost along the plants that you're already growing in your raised beds or in the ground. And this will add a lot of rich organic matter into your soil. And all you do is just use a cultivator to mix it in very well with the soil. And this is also a good time to get rid of any weeds that are there in your raised bed or the soil. And the main benefit of using the vermicompost or the worm tea is that it helps plants uptake nutrients, and this results in stronger plants that can fight off insects and diseases. And the next product we are looking at is the worm tea, which comes in 3 different sizes as you see here. And it is basically tea that is prepared from vermicompost, and it also has a lot of good beneficial nutrients that you can give to your plants. Now this worm tea has to be mixed with water in order for you to apply this to your garden, and you can do a foliar application as well as drench your soil with this worm tea. This is a 1/3 cup measurement, and what I'm doing is I'm taking about 6 of this measurement. 6 to 7 is good enough for a 2-gallon container. And you can look at the instructions on the label to see how much you need to mix with water in order to apply it to your plants. Now once you've added the worm tea into your watering can, you can just fill it up with water. And then what I usually do is just drench my plants completely with this solution. And what I'm doing here is I'm adding a lot of beneficial nutrients, a lot of beneficial bacteria into the soil. and this will really help the plants uptake a lot of nutrients. Now these okra plants were not doing too great, and I really wanted to revitalize these okra plants, and the worm tea really helps in such scenarios. It's very similar to seaweed, where it really invigorates the plants and helps them build a stronger system, stronger stems, stronger leaves, and this really helps with overall plant growth. So it is recommended that you use this product in your garden every week, but I would say even if you use it every 15 days or so, it's a good addition to your garden bed or your soil. You're adding a lot of beneficial nutrients in the soil. And this product looked to be of very great quality. It was well packaged, and we will see the results soon. We will wait for a few weeks or a few months to see how our plants do. But if you're doing organic gardening, this is a great addition to your garden. And I also like supporting family-owned companies, especially in Southern California. So if you want to buy their products, please do check out the links in the comments below and in the video description below. So there we have it, folks. That was our episode on the California garden for the month of April. If you like this video, do give us a thumbs up. And if you have any comments, leave them in the comments box below. And see you again soon. Happy gardening.